Welcome back into Hold My Banner. Casey Hudson, Ante Campbell, now joined by Jay King, Celtics staff writer for The Athletic. Jay, thank you so much for taking the time to quickly hop on with us and break things down. We always talk about guests helping us temper expectations. And, well, we have a lot of expectations that we're running through. So how are you to start things off?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for joining us. Now, the first thing that I have to bother you about, Jay, because press conferences, they always give you either a lot of hope or a lot of despair. Well, when you find out that Jayson Tatum is stealing Brad's treadmill, you start to get a lot of hope, obviously. So I need a realistic take on, what this does for team morale, but more importantly, what the reality should be upon his potential return and whether that return should happen this upcoming season.
Yeah, look, is it realistic that he returns sometime this season? Maybe. It would be 9 months in February, which is around the All-Star break. Historically, not everybody has returned that quickly, but some guys have. And everything you've heard about Jayson Tatum's surgery, his recovery, has been optimistic. He got the surgery the day after the injury happened, which apparently makes a pretty big deal in the recovery to do it that quickly. Everybody has raved about how diligent he has been in his work since then. And I mean, Jayson Tatum, he has for years done whatever he could to try to get on the court, no matter who they're playing, no matter what the situation is. So you can imagine that after an 8-9 month absence, he's going to be fighting the Celtics to get back as quickly as possible. They need to be smart about it. But I think, if he does get to the point where he's 100%, then I don't think there's a point to holding him out for the rest of the season just because. But he has to get there first. And even if he does come back this season, I think there's very little chance that we see the Jayson Tatum that we're used to seeing on the court this season. He'll be on a minutes restriction. He won't be as athletic probably as we're used to seeing him. And it's going to take a while to knock off that rust and get back to full strength.
Peyton Pritchard makes it sound like he's going to be back immediately and killing. He said, you know what he said. He says that he's going to come back even better, but, it will take some time. I definitely agree with that. What will not take some time is how we figure out when this team is going to be a good team or a bad team. I think we're going to kind of know pretty quickly how good this team is. But what do you think the Celtics' biggest strength is going into the season with this iteration of the team?
They're perimeter players. They still have championship-proven players on the perimeter. Jaylen Brown, Derek White, Peyton Pritchard. That's the core of the team right now. Throw Sam Hauser in there if you want. And then with Anthony Simons being acquired, there's still a lot of shooting, a lot of playmaking on this roster. Now, the front court is a total issue and an enormous question mark. But I think you can really trust those smaller guys. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how Joe Mazzulla adjusts the play style. All the talk from the first couple of days of training camp is that they want to play fast. They want to get up into people. They have had a tough camp from the sound of it, and they're going to ramp up the pace, and I think they're going to lean a lot on those smaller guys.
I love that you mentioned that there's still a lot of talent on this team because I feel like that kind of gets forgotten, obviously, with all of the air being taken out of Boston behind Jayson Tatum's injury and just kind of trying to accept that you might potentially not see him for another year. But I always love to ask about an underdog because sometimes surprises come in completely different packages. And while there are some now new faces to this team or unknown figures, do you have an underdog or two on your radar that, we can keep an eye out for, add to the hope pile?
I think Luka Garza is an interesting one. If you look at his per-minute stats, he's been very productive when he's been on the court. I know he has some serious defensive limitations, and that has kept him off the court in Minnesota so far. He was behind some great players in Minnesota. He wasn't just sitting behind scrubs. It was Rudy Gobert, Karl Towns, Julius Randle, Naz Reid, all guys who are very, very talented. And so he's been waiting for this opportunity. I think he'll get one. And I think he could surprise some people with how productive he is. If you look at his advanced stats with offensive rebounding, he's been one of the best offensive rebounders since he stepped into the NBA. Obviously, that's been in very limited minutes and not the highest leverage minutes. But I think he's got a chance to surprise some people. And then you look at the younger guys with Baylor Shireman, Jordan Walsh, Josh Minott. Those guys will all have their chances because after Jaylen Brown and Sam Hauser, they're there's really like a lack of wings on this roster, and I think there's opportunity there. I don't know which of those guys will step up, but they're going to need one of them at least.
So look, you're talking about wings, you're talking about front court. You don't seem like you're very excited about either of those things. But what would you say? People are wondering what the biggest downfall to the Celtics could be this year. What would you say the biggest weakness is for this team?
Yeah, I would say the front court. Everyone talks about the center position, and I think the guys are unproven there. But Neemias Queta, like, we've seen him be productive. We've seen him be okay in minutes with the Celtics. He was a fourth string center last season. Now he might be the starter. So it's going to be a huge change in role. But I think he and Luka Garza have done enough in their very limited minutes. I think you feel okay about that, actually. It's power forward that I might have the biggest question marks about. Do you go small with Sam Hauser? How bad are you going to be rebounding if you do that? Do you go with Chris Boucher? He's started 23 games in his career. He's nearly 33 years old. Do you go with Xavier Tillman? Like, you didn't really want to play him last year. He dealt with knee issues throughout the whole season. That was an issue. If he's healthy, then he's a very good defender who can do a lot of different things, bring the versatility that you lost with Al Horford, Kristaps Porzingis, Luke Cornett leaving. But I just think what they do at power forward is going to be interesting. To me, I would go small. I would start Sam Hauser, but I just think you're so vulnerable at that point, playing that small. You're vulnerable on the glass, but I think that's why they want to play much faster, because they are going to be small, and they're going to have to play faster to kind of overcome their limitations as a roster. This is by far the worst defensive roster that Joe Mazzulla has ever coached.
Yeah, you're 100% right about that. And I love that you brought up Queta. And I asked John Corrales, who was one of our previous guests earlier this summer, about Queta, because I know you're probably, paying attention to Euro Cup and looking at those things. And you see him out there making the shot. He made a three. He stepped out to 15-foot, made a 15-footer. Not this year. I'll look to more towards the future. Do you think we could see Queta kind of becoming a little bit more of a stretch big, like we saw how Al Horford kind of transitioned to that later on in his career? Maybe even a Brook Lopez, who never took a three when he was in Brooklyn, and then kind of transitioned into that later on in his career. Could you see that kind of transition happening for Queta?
Obviously, it's something that he puts in a lot of time at, and it's something that he wants to add to his game. The difference between him and Al Horford, Al Horford was always a very good mid-range shooter. He just had to expand his range, whereas Nemi, everything has been close to the basket so far. So do I expect him to shoot threes this year? Not really. Joe Mazzulla was on, I believe it was a radio yesterday, saying they don't have a stretch big right now. And that's a huge difference between their roster now, their roster last season. I don't think he expects Nemi to shoot many threes this year. I don't think he really expects too many of their guys to shoot a lot of threes, although Luka Garza has shot them. Hasn't necessarily made them, but he shot them in the past. They're going to have to adapt, because with Al Horford, with Kristaps Porzingis, every single person they put out there could shoot threes, with the probable exception of Luke Cornett. And now you don't have that anymore. Your bigs are going to be more traditional, and I think they'll be actually a much better offensive rebounding team with Nemi and Luka Garza. But you're going to have to figure out new ways to score without Jayson Tatum and without those stretch bigs.
All right, Ante mentioned not getting too far into the future. I'm going to play devil's advocate. I'm going to bring the future in a little too quickly here. You've got some guys that are on the bubble that should be starting off in the G League, Shugla and then Junior. But I wonder if there's any guys that stand out to you that are kind of on the cusp that can eventually be a good pillar for this team or an impactful player for this team. Because sometimes when you have such unknown rosters as the Celtics could potentially be dealing with going into this season, opportunities present themselves and development becomes a key focus there versus trying to really go for any push during this upcoming season.
Yeah, I would put Hugo Gonzalez as the one there. He's obviously their first round pick, but he's really young. Didn't play a lot of minutes last season on Real Madrid, his former team. They had a ton of former NBA players, including Facu Campazzo and Serge Ibaka, and there were when you're a teenager in that ecosystem for a team that good in Europe, you're probably not going to be playing minutes unless you're like Luka Doncic. He's not Luka Doncic, but he intrigues me because he plays super hard. He has that competitive fabric you want, and he's pretty skilled for a guy who is about 6'7". So I want to see how Ugo develops. I think, if they hit on a guy like that, then it's going to make a big difference down the line. And I don't think he'll play much for the Celtics this year. We saw some serious ups and downs even in summer league, though he was coming right off his Spanish season and probably shouldn't be judged off that. I just think, from a competitive standpoint and from a size skill standpoint, he's really intriguing to me long term.
He's definitely very intriguing. He has a long way to go. There's some other guys that have a long way to go for this Boston Celtics team as well. Who needs to step up the most? Like, who needs to take the biggest jump from what we've actually seen from their basketball playing career to this season in order for this team to be successful?
So I don't really think he has to take a big jump. I just think he has to do it differently, and that's Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown, he's been a great scorer for the Celtics. He's been the Finals MVP. He's done a ton of great things for the Celtics. I just think without Jayson Tatum, he's going to have more pressure on him to free up other guys. And I want to see how that looks. On my podcast, I have repeatedly mentioned this one kind of random stat. But when Jayson Tatum was off the court last season, Jaylen Brown assisted almost 10 times per 100 possessions on teammates' baskets. And that's a really good number. That's a number that's about double what he did when Jayson Tatum was on the court. So I think the playmaking might surprise some people. I think the assist numbers might surprise some people. And everybody's looking at it like the number one option. He's going to have to score more. And I think, yeah, that's probably the case to some extent. But to me, it's like, can you get Nemi easy buckets? Can you get Luka Garza easy buckets? Can you make the game easier for Anthony Simons and Derek White and Peyton Pritchard, guys who used to rely on Jayson Tatum to do a lot of that for them? And I'm excited to see Jaylen with this new opportunity. I think he's excited for it, and I think he'll approach it the right way and try to, be a winning basketball player rather than just trying to get his stats up.
I love it. Let's talk Anthony Simons for a minute, because when you're coming in the way that he did, I feel like too many people quickly wrote him off and said, let's package him in a trade deal and just move on, because some fans were just kind of ready to blow up this roster and foresee into the future. Is there a way that you feel confident that he's going to make himself an immovable piece for this Boston Celtics team? Because I think he's looking for a new home. I think he's ready to be that guy where the expectations have been on him for his entire NBA career, but now probably has the ability to do it with less noise, even though the Boston market is going to apply the pressure.
Yeah, he's in an interesting spot in his career because he used to be the golden boy sort of for Portland. And obviously they just traded him for Drew Holiday, he's Drew Holiday, fantastic player, but he's 35 with $104 million left on his contract. So that kind of speaks to where Portland saw Anthony Simons. On an expiring contract, he needs to prove not that he can score. Everyone knows that he can score. Everyone knows that he's been a very good offensive player. He needs to show he can contribute to winning and defend at a much higher level. And I think it's a really good opportunity for him to do that. He seems to be taking the right approach to it. At media day, he stressed like 5 or 6 times, I want to contribute to winning. When asked if he wanted to start, said he didn't care. He just wants to contribute to winning. And I think, he should feel the pressure to show that he can defend at a much higher level. Some of the stats show that he's been one of the worst defenders in the NBA throughout his time in the league. And I don't know if it's that bad. Joe Mazzulla has told him he's not as bad as people believe he is, but he's a weak link defensively, and he needs to change that. And, especially in Boston, where the culture has been that they've been a great defensive team, they don't put up with weak links on that end. And so he's got to prove it there.
All right, I'll leave you with this, Jay. I asked a 2-part question, and I'll get you out of here, all right? Look, first of all, you bring up Anthony Simons, and a lot of the talk around him here in Boston is trade. Trade deadline is going to come. Everybody's wondering what this team is going to do. Do you think that there's going to be a big move happening for this Boston Celtics team at the trade deadline? And the second part of this question is, what do you think the ceiling of this Boston Celtics team is? Like, do you think this team actually can be a contender and make it back to the Eastern Conference Finals? Or do you think this is a team that really their ceiling is the playoffs and that's about it?
So with regard to the ceiling, I think it's pretty high if they stay healthy, but they have to stay healthy. This isn't last year where you could lose Kristaps Porzingis for half the season and still thrive. They don't have that depth anymore. They don't have that You're not bringing Peyton Pritchard off the bench and giving him more opportunity. Like, he's going to be one of your main guys now. So if Jaylen Brown misses extensive time, they're going to fall apart. They are. But as long as they stay healthy, they could win close to 50 games. They could win a round or two in the playoffs. That wouldn't shock me. But yeah, for trades, I don't think adding a important piece is probable. I would say, if anything, they could look to get under the luxury tax. Right now, they're about $12 million over the luxury tax threshold. To get under that would take, probably trading Simons, shedding a lot of salary in that move or subsequent moves. But yeah, that could be something they do. But it all depends on what the market is, how Simons does for them, and there's a lot of moving pieces right now, and a lot of things for Brad Stevens to consider.
The state of the team at the time, 100%. A lot of moving pieces.
A lot of moving pieces and a lot of questions to still be answered, which keeps us all on the edge of our seat. But at this point, I feel like that's the Boston theme. Continue to sweat and hold your breath. We'll all be doing it tonight for the Red Sox game. Jay, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on Hold My Banner. Make sure you guys catch more Celtics insight from Jay King over at The Athletic.